Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Should you invest in the Detroit metro real estate market? After all, it's in the cash-flowing Midwest, but is there a stigma involved? And does that even matter? Today on episode 434 of the GRE podcast. Mid-South homebuyers with over 2 decades as the nation's highest-rated turnkey provider, their empathetic property managers use your return on investment as their North Star. It's no wonder smart investors line up to get their completely renovated income properties like it's the newest iPhone. Headquartered in Memphis with their globally attractive cash flows, Mid-South has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and 4,000 houses renovated. There is zero markup on maintenance, let that sink in, and they average a 98.9% occupancy rate with an industry-leading 3.5-year average renter term. Every home they offer you will have brand new components, a bumper-to-bumper 1-year warranty, new 30-year roofs, and wait for it, a high-quality renter in an astounding price range, $100,000 to $150,000. Get to know Mid-South. Enjoy cash flow from day one at midsouthhomebuyers.com. That's midsouthhomebuyers.com. GRE listeners can't stop talking about their service from Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They've provided our tribe with more loans than anyone. They're truly a top lender for beginners and veterans. It's where I go to get my own loans for single-family rental property up to 4plexes. So start your pre-qualification and you can chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. They'll even deliver your custom plan for growing your real estate portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE. From Stirling, Scotland to Sterling Heights, Michigan, and across 188 nations worldwide, I'm Keith Weinhold, and this is Get Rich Education. Today, we're talking about the city that perhaps you never thought we would discuss on this show. Well, back in the 1950s, this place was considered the wealthiest city in the entire world. I'm talking about Detroit, Michigan, and its real estate market.
What you talking about, Willis?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Detroit has experienced a precipitous downfall last century. And you know, in my lifetime, it has probably been ridiculed, mocked, and scorned more than any American metro market that I can think of. And late last century, they sure did see a major, and I mean a major drop, an exodus of jobs, and an exodus of the middle class and a declining population. And much of that is tied to what was Detroit's manufacturing legacy and the fact that they did not immediately replace the manufacturing plants that had met the end of their useful life. They didn't quickly accommodate modern replacement plants, and they didn't do that for quite some time. And back at that time, at the height of the decline, that was accompanied by what critics have cited as high taxes, regulation, poor services, corruption, and bad public administration. And there ended up being a lot of ugly, crime-ridden, and boarded-up neighborhoods and major population loss in the city center. And there sure still are some of those neighborhoods there today. And in fact, at one time, Detroit, the city itself, filed for bankruptcy. Well, now we're here in a new century's third decade, and many believe that the majority of that down-spiraling activity is in the past. In fact, we're going to discuss the new population numbers. And just recently here, Time magazine named their world's greatest places to live today. There are only 5 American cities on that list, and one of them is now Detroit. Yes, the world's greatest places to live today. Now, like some episodes are here at GRE, today's episode is years in the making. There was research from the in-person to the anecdotal to the empirical, and one catalyst that really set this in motion for me personally is that about 5 years ago, one of the nation's most prominent income property lenders, and he's also a friend of mine and a very active nationwide real estate investor, he made a visit to Detroit, and he let me know how surprised and impressed he was, and he told me that I ought to see it for myself. And then our own COO here in-house, Aundrea, she decided, of all the places in the world, to move from her home of Georgia over to where her husband was from, Metro Detroit, in 2020. So they chose to make Metro Detroit their home. And here at GRE, this all increased our rate of research, including the reading of reviews and forum posts and more on both the market and the Detroit real estate provider that you'll meet today. This provider identifies and rehabs rental homes in the area and connects you with management and a rent-paying tenant. So you can keep that in your portfolio as an investor for long-term cash flow. And Aundrea was able to tour their offices in 3 of their available properties, and she's actually going to come in and join us at the end of the show today to tell us more about that. One important thing to keep in mind with the Detroit Metro is that an old reputation, that does not exempt an area from the same basic laws of supply and demand and the desirability to live in a certain geography and all the existing infrastructure, and actually a pretty preferred national location that Detroit has, which we're going to discuss. The proximity to the Great Lakes is remarkable. In fact, just one of the 5 Great Lakes, Lake Superior, that is the largest freshwater lake in the world by area. And you kind of hear this growing chorus that there are more and more people that feel that as the climate gets warmer and drier in many world places, whether you feel that way or not, as more and more people tend to feel that plentiful fresh water can be an overlooked long-term amenity for places like Detroit. Now, me personally, I don't know about that one, this water supply proximity. I mean, sure, that's something that helps, but really I think it remains to be seen with just how much of a factor that is in the desirability to live in a place. I hear some climatologists predict that there will be what they call climate migrants to places in the upper Midwest like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. I think that remains to be seen. And not one time in my life have I ever heard anyone identify themselves as a climate migrant. I haven't heard that yet, but nonetheless, outside that, the Detroit Metro has some pretty compelling stories anyway, outside of their plentiful fresh water. And it's more than just the presence of the big 3 auto manufacturers, which are all there: GM, Ford, and Stellantis. Stellantis is formerly known as Chrysler. Those big 3 aren't just there. In fact, today, all 3 are headquartered in Michigan, and the contribution of billions of dollars into Detroit from deep-pocketed entrepreneurs like Dan Gilbert and Mike Ilitch have all helped. Well, basically, you can follow and invest perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars in income property if you think that's right for you, even if you don't have some of those entrepreneurs' billions. So that's what today's show will help you explore. And this is the type of investment, just like with most of our GRE marketplace providers, where you're investing in made in America. We're talking about U.S. labor and often U.S. supplies. And of course, it is U.S. real estate. Detroit has so much existing infrastructure that instead of building brand new construction residential rental property, which is more costly, it's often more efficient for you to purchase a freshly rehabbed property. So that's what you're doing here. Buying property fully rehabbed from roof to HVAC. And as you know, that newly rehabbed condition, that lowers your maintenance and repair costs in the early years. And one thing that you might not have thought about is how a fully rehabbed property, that also reduces tenant frustration, because that tenant of yours will have fewer maintenance calls, making them want to stay longer. Now, Detroit is one of those markets where, and I often find this peculiar, where tenants are the ones that provide their own refrigerator and their own stove. Some markets in the Midwest and South are just customarily like that. Yes, tenants travel with their fridge and stove is another way to put it. So as we discuss Metro Detroit, which is in the southeast part of Michigan, understand that the downtown section of Detroit is also in the southeast part of the greater metro. And a lot of the outlying metro areas are north of the downtown, like Livonia, Auburn Hills, Warren, and Troy. Like most of these episodes that we do, when we drill down into one geographic market with a local property provider, if you're listening to this show 2 or 4 years from now, this information is still pretty valid. Other than that, prices and rents only tend to go higher. Today, we're discussing the Detroit metro real estate market. Hey, well, I've got 2 local area real estate experts with us today. As for the first time ever in the history of the show, more than 8 years here, we discussed the Detroit metro area's cash flow real estate market. Welcome onto the show.
Thank you for having us, Keith. We're very excited to be on here, and we are definitely listeners of your podcast for many years, so we're excited.
I really appreciate the following from the both of you. People have some correct conceptions of Detroit, and people also have a lot of misconceptions about the Detroit metro area, as I have learned. And a lot of that has to do with geography. And my audience knows I love discussing this portion here about the geography. One of my degrees is in geography. I think a lot of people know that Detroit is in southeastern Michigan. I think some of the misconceptions start with, first of all, Detroit is in the eastern time zone, not the central time zone. It's not on a Great Lake. It's on the Detroit River between Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair. And the thing that blows a lot of people away is that it is adjacent to Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And to travel from Detroit by either tunnel or bridge to get to Windsor, you actually go south from Detroit to Ontario. You kind of have to look on a map to figure that one out. Detroit is a significant place, not just historically, but it still is today. It is the 14th largest MSA in the United States with about 4.4 million people. Between 2000 and 2010, the population dropped, but in the latest decennial census between 2010 and 2020, it grew a little over 2%. So it is a growing place, but that's sort of what I think about as the overview geographically for Detroit and its magnitude today.
Yeah, I think you touched on some key points there. The misconception and the conception of Detroit. It's funny that you brought that up because when I have these introductory calls with newer clients that I'm getting to know and they want to know more about Detroit, one of the questions I ask them is, what is the first thing you think of when I say the word Detroit? And I remember for years when I first started asking this question, I used to hear war zone or ghost town or all these crazy things. And I would say probably 4 years ago is when I started hearing growth, Motor City, steady. And I started hearing these great positive things from clients. And I seen that shift starting to happen. But really, Detroit overall, probably the last decade or so, has been on the upswing. And I think Mike can touch more on that as well, as most people are starting to hear the greatest secret of the country about 3-4 years ago.
Great point. And I want to bring up, someone like Dan Gilbert, who has really made an incredible impact on the city of Detroit and the surrounding neighborhoods. He went in there and he invested. He had this vision back in about 2008 and 9, 10 timeframe where he started buying up a lot of the downtown buildings, renovating them, bringing in new businesses. The IT sector went up incredible. We're one of the top in the country, top 10 to 15, I think it was, in growth for IT. He also started making a big effect around the city of Detroit, where he moved his headquarters from Livonia, Michigan, to downtown. And the surrounding neighborhoods started to have that trickle effect of what starts in the central downtown area of Detroit. And it's unbelievable. The rents that used to be $1,200 or $1,300 downtown, $1,200 or $1,300 a month, is now $3,000, $3,500. And it definitely trickled out to the city suburbs and into Metro Detroit. So he is a big factor, as well as, Little Caesars. That was
Mike Ilitch.
With Mike Ilitch, him and his organization creating Little Caesars Arena, their investment organization, Olympia Investment, investing in a lot of commercial and multifamily real estate. So those are the 2 biggest factors that created so much
opportunity here in Detroit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now let's talk some more about those economic sectors. Real estate investors care about that long term. Of course, we buy a property with the tenant that's in it today just as much as we buy a property with the intent or the expectation that 24 months down the road, when that initial tenant vacates, we have a reasonable expectation that there will be another tenant that comes in and can pay the rent. So that all comes back to the economic sectors that you're starting to talk about. When people think about Detroit, they often think about Ford or GM or some of the major auto manufacturers first. So why don't we start there?
Ford and GM and Chrysler, they are making a lot of money now. I'll tell you that. As we all know, if you go to a dealership nowadays, you're paying more for your lease or your car that you buy. Hence, the fact that there is tons of workers that work in these factories, that work in these office buildings. Detroit being the headquarters for GM, Ford, and Chrysler, it's a large market for us. And we see the auto industry as only having an upside. And those are a lot of our tenants. You know, we have the blue collar workers, some of the white collar workers. When we're looking for a tenant, those are who are living in our homes. The school teacher, the worker that works at a factory, the engineer that works at Ford. So our turnaround of tenants is wonderful because we also do pick the right neighborhoods that attract our idea tenant to rent the house.
And to capitalize on what Mike was saying, also the tech industry. The tech industry has really took off here over the last 5 to 7 years. And we've been seeing a lot of the millennials that have been moving from the suburbs into the downtown area. And also to touch on that, the health industry. I see tons of applicants that are tied to the health industry here in the Metro Detroit. I know you touched a little bit about that, Keith, earlier on this. And the health industry is a fairly large employment out here in the Metro Detroit area. And
University of Michigan Hospital, you have Henry Ford Hospital, you have Detroit Medical Center, Beaumont Health. These are, hospitals and organizations that employ upwards close to 500,600,000 people plus in its area. I mean, it's quite impressive, from nurses to workers in the hospital to the staff. It's amazing that, we're blessed to be in a town that has the big three here, the hospital sector that's booming, IT that's booming. And our biggest factor is the small business. It's amazing that, there's so many places of employment for people out here that people really don't think of when they think about Detroit. But when they come see it for themselves, that's why we always invite clients out. We say, come take a look at it, see what's going on over here. And when they do, they walk into our homes and they see this home in a great area, renovated, vinyl plank flooring, granite countertops, new cabinets. And they say, okay, well, if someone had to choose where to live and they walk into a home like this that is well renovated with city certificates of occupancy and that craftsmanship that draws that clientele to want to live in the homes, that's what we do.
Yeah, we've been talking about economic sectors. I discussed geography earlier, and one sector that's really important to Detroit is distribution. When you think about the geography and the links to the Great Lakes that Detroit has, this makes it more feasible to do a lot of business and trade. All the cities that are on the Great Lakes that Detroit's easily tied to, it costs about 1/12 as much to move goods over water as it does land, and all those other connected cities on the Great Lakes include Chicago and Milwaukee and Cleveland and Buffalo and even Toronto. So you can understand Detroit's strategic importance from a distribution perspective. And that's really important because distribution jobs are locally tied to that geography. And therefore, the people that work in those jobs can't be outsourced to somewhere else. So Detroit is well positioned that way. But you touched on the medical. That's something a lot of other people don't realize. Recently, Detroit's their hospital sector was ranked 4th in the nation. Medical, that's that sort of sector that sometimes that's more concentrated in a metro area rather than some others that are dispersed across a metro area. So you touched on the neighborhoods earlier. Do you have neighborhoods that are particularly tied to some of these sectors, including medical or other ones, in you making that neighborhood selection for what makes a good long-term cash flowing property with a rent-paying tenant?
One of the cities that comes to mind immediately is the city of Warren. It's one of the largest cities. Yeah, it's one of the largest cities all over Metro Detroit, and it's tied to a lot of the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 suppliers. and you'll see a lot of manufacturing coming out of the city of Warren. It's also where they're located with the GM plant. And a lot of employment, like I said, is from that field out there in the city of Warren. And I see a lot of success renting to tenants and having a lot of success in the city buying and selling properties in the city of Warren.
Okay, now that you've talked about Warren, just tell us about how far out from the center of the metro that you might buy in that outlying geography.
If we use downtown Detroit as a focal point, I would say we're anywhere about 30 to 40 miles centrically, making a circumference around the city of Detroit.
The city of Warren, they're all connected to the major jobs through the freeways. So you have I-75, I-94, and 96, which, connect all these cities to where the jobs are at, whether they be downtown Detroit or some of the Metro Detroit areas such as Detroit or Southfield or Troy. So it's very accessible for people to get to these jobs. And that's one of the things that we look for when we're buying the home. Is it accessible to major freeways, to employment in the downtown area or other major cities that have a lot of the employment? That's a deciding factor when we're looking at homes.
One of my favorite answers is the 15-minute answer. I get a lot of clients, hey, how far is this city from downtown Detroit? Or how far is the office from here or from there? And I would always say it's probably around 15 minutes. So Mike brings up a great point. The accessibility from all these highway standpoints to getting over to the properties or to the employment is roughly about a 15-minute drive.
Yeah, speaking about drive too, I know that Keith had mentioned earlier in the conversation that being in the Great Lakes region, we are the largest point of entry for Canada. So there is we have tons of trucking logistics companies that are out here. It's amazing. So we have 2 bridges, a tunnel that, allow for incoming transportation and visitors from Canada ingoing, outgoing. And like I said, it's the largest point of entry into Canada from the United States is Detroit, Michigan. And a lot of people don't know that. And that is a huge source for you go into the hotel industry, the transportation industry, logistics. There's so many sources. It really does. It creates a lot of opportunity.
You, the listener, might be wondering just what the cash flowing sweet spot neighborhoods look like and what their character is. We're going to describe that next. You're listening to Get Rich Education. We're talking about cash flow real estate investing in the Detroit Metro. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. If you're looking to grow your passive income from real estate, pay attention. My Property Stats is a deal analysis tool developed by an active investor to cut the time it takes to analyze any deal by over 90%. For any real estate class, you can calculate the exact price to pay to hit your cash flow and IRR goals. Build a world-class pro forma. Calculate the most you should pay for a renovation. Run multiple scenarios with a comparison tool and more. My Property Stats is the all-in-one toolkit for real estate investors. That means more deals, more cash flow, and more returns. Go to mypropertystats.com/GRE now and use the coupon code GRE to get 10% off your first year. That's just $90 a year for a tool that can save 10 hours per deal. No more spreadsheets, no more juggling multiple files. Use coupon code GRE to get 10% off at mypropertystats.com/GRE. When you want the best real estate and finance info, the modern internet experience limits your free articles access, and it's replete with paywalls, and you get pop-ups and push notifications and cookies disclaimers. Ugh. At no other time in history has it been more vital to place nice, clean, free content in your hands that actually adds no hype value to your life. That's why this is the golden age of quality newsletters, and I write ours myself. It's got a dash of humor, and it is to the point. To get it, it couldn't be more simple. Just type up a text message with the letters GRE in the body and send it to the phone number 66866. And when you start the free newsletter, you'll also get my 1-hour fast real estate course completely free. Subscribe to my Don't Quit Your Daydream newsletter, and your mind will be wired for wealth. Text GRE to 66866 Text GRE to 66866.
Hi, this is Russell Gray, co-host of the Real Estate Guys radio show, and you're listening to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking about a subject that we have not talked about before, cash flow real estate investing, one of the largest Midwestern markets that there are. Talking about Metro Detroit here. And oftentimes we think about a market, but as we know, as cash flow real estate investors, that often comes down to a sub-market where we have that cash flowing sweet spot. So with that in mind, can you talk to us about the character of the neighborhoods that you do your buying for investors in?
We target stable and dependable neighborhoods that have a high rental demand. Just like any other major metropolitan city in the country, you have your good and you have your bad. And obviously those bad is somewhere that we don't mess with or invest in. But overall, when you drive down one of our streets, there's no board ups, there's no vacancies, there's no vacant lots, there's no burn downs. We don't mess with any of those areas. What we try to target is beautiful tree-lined street that are uniformed, and we even get into some pockets of Detroit that have these beautiful Victorian-style character homes that are all characteristically shaped differently, and it just brings a lot of unique value also to these properties. And the best way for me to describe them is these tree-lined streets when you're driving down and you're just looking at every house shaped differently. One thing that I always hear clients saying is, oh man, if you were to put this street on my neighborhood where I live, these homes would sell for millions of dollars. And that's a line I would hear all the time. When you walk even into one of our properties, the type of rehabs that we get into, like Mike was saying earlier, you know, these properties go through an aesthetically pleasing renovation that are all up to city code that meet a certificate of occupancy. So plumbing, HVAC, electrical, windows, roofing, all have to go through a certain certification in order to pass and be able to place a tenant in there. And we do that for you on the front end prior to the purchase.
We only buy all brick homes. So you're looking at nice uniform streets where people want to live. The last 9 years we've worked together, pulling up to a home, we want to put ourselves in a resident's shoes and say, would we want to live here? Is this a nice street? Then walking into the home, you walk into a newly renovated property, the tenant wants to live there. Then I put myself in the investor's shoes. I say, would I buy one of these homes for $110,000, $105,000, $120,000? And I say, wow, I mean, this is just a great situation. You have a great home, great area. I know we haven't hit on this topic yet, but with great returns. So you have a brick home that is something that, like Al said, you put it in the city of LA. I mean, you're selling it for $1 million or more, you know? So that's exciting to us. And we always want to put ourselves in the tenant shoes as well as investor shoes.
All right. So what's typically in your buy box is a B-class area. Oftentimes it's a renovated, detached, single-family home with a purchase price of $100 to $120K.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes, you know, you even get up to the point where you are in some A neighborhoods and you're in the 130 to 140 range.
I would say that's absolutely accurate. Keep it south of 150. You're very safe with us. But our sweet spot, like you just said, Keith, is probably that $120,000 range is where we do a lot of our sales.
And these are very nebulous terms in real estate, Class A housing, Class B housing. But what would you call Class A housing in these areas that you're talking about? Describe that.
So good point. Just like you said a second ago, I believe that everybody has a different definition of classifications. But really what dictates the classification is also the market. Because a C-class neighborhood in, Metro Detroit could be different C-class neighborhood in Milwaukee or LA or whatever the case is. But here in Detroit, when you're talking A-class, it's mostly centric towards homeowner neighborhoods, mostly dominated by homeowners. You'll see maybe a very small mix of renters, but you'll see a lot of what we call pride of ownership is what I like to call it here. And you'll drive by and you'll see that mostly in A-class, but when you get into a nice B-class also street, you'll see that as well.
When I think about pride of ownership, oftentimes that can show from the street level. I know that you offer tours for investors there, so investors could see that on that level, or they could peruse something like Google Street View. And I think about pride of ownership and some of the subtle signs. I think, all right, well, what is the type of car that one might park on the street or in their driveway? And if one feels safe enough about parking a good car outside overnight, that probably says something about the safety of the neighborhood. That doesn't tell you everything. And are the lawns mowed? And do people pick up trash around the neighborhood? So can you just tell us more about your buy box? I mean, you spoke a little bit to the character and what you avoid earlier, but can you speak more to that? Some of those tangible pride of ownership things in these neighborhoods?
One of the things that we look for are certain areas that will rent for $1,100 to $1,200 plus a month. That's one of our indicators. We want to be in an area that's definitely north of $1,000. So that also attracts a certain sector of the market that, the teachers, the nurses, the blue collar and the white collar workers that we want to bring into our homes. Our buy box, is generally in the lower $100,000 range, where we feel that the returns are there, the value is there. These homes are the brick on them. We look at what would it cost to rebuild with the brick today?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
you're like, wow, okay, if I was just to brick this home, it's going to cost me $30,000 to $40,000. So the rebuild cost, we're like, how much would this cost to rebuild this 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1.5 bathroom home with a basement and a garage? And Al and I look at it, we're like, hey, we're upwards towards a $180 to $200 per square foot mark to rebuild that home. So you're looking, $250,000 plus to rebuild that home nowadays. We look at it from that factor, and then the demand from a rental standpoint in that area. Then we look at the fact that this is an asset that is in demand always for rent, no matter where the market's at. Sometimes there's adjustment on rental rates, but we just feel that we have a home that's always going to be in demand for someone to live in because of the area, the rental. And that's why we just feel that Detroit and Southeast Michigan is jewel and the gem that a lot of people, when they find, they love it.
Regardless of the market.
Regardless of the market, it's in demand.
Well, you talked about some of the remodeling standards at the beginning of the interview. You mentioned the rents of $1,100 to $1,200 and the price points up around $120K. That right there meets the old 1% rent to value threshold that some people like to look for, engage with their investments. And you're talking about how the replacement cost is potentially double of what the sale price of these homes are. You might see the replacement cost reflected on an appraisal as well when it comes time for the investor to go ahead and line up their financing for that property. How has it gone with the financing and the appraisals for investors?
We've had a pretty good success rate. Overall, especially with this market that we're dealing with right now, I can't remember the last time I've had an appraisal come under. I feel very confident in where we are price point wise and where our appraisals are coming in at. There are times, of course, there's some meat on the bone as well when an investor picks up a property. I've seen plenty of times over the course of the last couple of years where there's still some equity into the property as well when that appraisal comes back.
I always look at the home and, and the asset that we are buying before we buy it as an investor too. And I look at it that this asset, whether it be right now, 10 years from now, it's going to be in demand. We have great bones, in the homes that we have, great area. I look at it, where are housing prices going to go in the future as far as not only the rebuild costs, I don't know where that's going to go with materials and the costs, the national average to rebuild a home, but also with the market. I just feel that there's an effect with inflation. I'm taking advantage of it. We're taking advantage of it as a team now, and we're building up our inventory as much as possible. If we didn't have to sell any one of these homes, we never would. We would keep every single one of them, rent them out for good, and build that passive income, that mailbox money as much as possible. So they're assets that we are proud to sell. And we definitely feel that when investors come out here and they take a look at it firsthand, it just sells itself.
And I know you do offer tours there. You're very receptive to doing that because you want to help dispel any ideas that people might have when they haven't visited that market at all. So if one of you will tell us about the tours, then the other can go ahead and leave us with any final thoughts you have to wrap it up.
We are very welcoming to clients coming out here, spending a day with me, half a day with me, wherever you are in the country. You want to come out here for a few hours, whatever the case may be. We are open, and we highly recommend an investor coming out here, seeing it firsthand. I can almost assure you that the perspective you'll be flying in with will be different than when you leave. So a lot of success from these tours, a lot of people coming in with the image of not really sure what's going on with Detroit. And then they come in here and see the blooming downtown Detroit market, and it usually sells itself, like Mike was saying. So highly encourage it, guys, especially during the week. If you guys ever want to come out here, take a tour with me, get an insider's look of our operation and see some of these properties firsthand, see what's going on in Metro Detroit. We welcome you guys.
As an investor, I definitely recommend you guys to come out during the week to see the industry, to see the downtown area, to see the offices that have the roads that are full, the rush hour. I mean,
the 9 to 5s. For sure.
No one likes to see the rush hour, but I mean, it's great. We love it for people to see what's going on here. There's so much movement all the time. There's new construction that's being built. The industries are booming, but we definitely recommend it during the week. A couple points that I want to leave everyone with is that we'd love to work with investors that get inspections on the home before they buy. Very important. We do third-party inspections. We don't like to sell a property without a third-party inspection because that's how confident we are with our homes. We actually have someone sign a waiver if they want to waive their third-party inspection because we want it. We are so confident in the process that we go through on the buy end to our detailed scope of work, which we deliver for ourselves to have the best home possible that gets a city inspection, accepts any tenant that's qualified, which we won't dig into now, but we'll dig into on future calls with clients. But we know the industry, we know what investors are looking for, and we're here to set up investors for diversification of their portfolio and financial success for the short and long term.
Wow. Well, that independent third-party inspection that an under contract buyer has done before they close on the property is something I always recommend. Interesting. I don't think I have ever heard of a company that wants that prospective buyer to go ahead and sign a waiver that they decline having that done, a measure I haven't heard of before. Well, if you want to learn more about this and learn more about the Metro and the neighborhoods they buy and see photographs of the properties and see the cash flowing pro forma, you can do that at gremarketplace.com/Detroit. That's where you can learn more. It's been really interesting opening up this big market in the upper Midwest that we've never talked about before. Thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hey, well, I'd like to welcome in Aundrea, the COO of GRE here. And, Aundrea does a lot of the behind the scenes work. She does things like compliance and tax and legal work that you don't see in order to keep this show vibrant. And though she and I are both active real estate investors, her skill set is substantially different from mine. I mean, from my perspective, she fills out all these kind of boring government forms, but helps keep us on track. And she's really good about doing those sorts of things and checking those boxes. And Aundrea, weren't you and I having a discussion recently? I was telling you, like, one of the things I really like to do here is write our Don't Quit Your Daydream letter and write that weekly newsletter to people. And you're like, my gosh, you like doing that? I can't believe it.
That's right. I will do just about anything other than write copy. You do much better at that than I do.
It's pretty remarkable. Yeah, it's kind of like I'm in similar disbelief that you're willing to do all this compliance stuff. So thank goodness, like the fact that we have different skill sets makes us really a good match together to help bring this show to people every week. So thank goodness that we're not too alike. And, interestingly, Aundrea, you now live in Metro Detroit. You chose to live there. And you moved there about a year or two ago?
Yeah, I moved here in 2021, about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, and you are from Brunswick, Georgia. You have been well educated and you worked in the corporate world internationally. You have your MBA. You did your schooling in the UK. You have worked in both India and the UK, and now you choose the Detroit Metro. So we'll get into why that is shortly. But, first of all, just pulling back bigger picture, I was talking previously about the population growth in Southeast Michigan with our guests. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Detroit's had been in decline for many, many, many years. And I think the 2020 census data was a little bit interesting to talk about that. There's been a lot of dialogue back and forth about the population of Detroit actually has probably grown more than we thought that it did based on the 2020 census data. So one of the things here locally is that the mayor has asked for an investigation into the census numbers because they were taken during the pandemic. And in Detroit, a lot of the population information is taken by the census people going house to house and talking to the residents that live there. And that didn't necessarily happen for the length that it normally would during the census. It was cut short a little bit early. So people really think that the population has grown more than we thought it did.
It could be up even more than what I stated there in the interview, up 2% between each of the last two decennial censuses in the MSA. It could be even greater than that. And you might have noticed Aundrea said here, because she is in the Detroit Metro now, where she and her husband and their young son live in Sterling Heights, Michigan, which is in the northern portion of the Detroit Metro. But Aundrea, now that you've lived there about a year and a half, sometimes people want to talk about a comeback story. So in your opinion, now that you've had a feel there and you've got to see how the landscape and some of the infrastructure has changed around you, do you think that Detroit is coming back? And, I'd really like to know anecdotally, we can read all these reports, but anecdotally, what you've seen on the ground there, because it seems like in the real estate world, a lot of, for example, real estate agents like to describe this or that area as up and coming, but some areas can be up and coming for decades. So tell us more about Detroit's comeback from your view there.
Yeah, I know people can't see me because we're on audio only right now, but I'm kind of laughing as you ask me this question because that is a constant back and forth my husband and I have. So he is from Detroit. He thinks there is no way Detroit is coming back no matter what. And I 100% disagree with him. So what I can see from living here is that there's a lot of investment monies that's come into Detroit over the last 10, 15 years. There are a lot of these old commercial buildings that are being renovated and they're being turned into something new. So grocery stores, apartment complexes. We see a lot of residential real estate investors in here now. The landscape's changing. There's a lot of money going into the downtown area. I think everyone knows Quicken Loans. The CEO of Quicken Loans has put a ton of money into the Detroit area over the last few years. And even Time Magazine named it one of the world's greatest places in 2022. And I think that says a lot.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully it's safe to ask this question since your husband is not within earshot, but because you're in the real estate industry and you follow trends like this, do you think that your opinion is somewhat more qualified, even though your husband has lived there longer than you?
100%. Even if my opinion wasn't data driven, I would say that, Keith.
I love it. Data driven. That's what we want to be. Well, you really are still a world traveler, so you really have a lot of great perspective when you analyze a metro area and a real estate market and what its market drivers are and the importance of the submarkets in each metro. So with all that, just tell us about why you chose to move to the Detroit Metro, why you chose, of all the places in the world, to move to Southeast Michigan.
It was a couple of reasons. So I think the first one is we, as you know, had our first little one last year and his entire family's here on my husband's side. So we wanted him to grow up with his cousins and be around them more often. That was the big reason. The second reason that I agreed when he asked to move here is I think there's a lot of opportunity here from both a business perspective as well as a real estate investing perspective. And so that opportunity excited me a lot.
Yeah, well, do you have any last things to tell us about that area? Now that you've lived there for a year and a half, you have all this real estate investing and travel experience. If someone is thinking about buying in that market, maybe with any particular submarkets they should pay attention to or something else, Aundrea?
I would say Detroit is a very interesting market. If you are wanting to purchase here and you're not familiar, find someone here that can help show you the ropes because neighborhoods change very quickly. You may be in one neighborhood in Detroit and you go, half a mile up the road and it's completely different. And it's either somewhere you'd want to invest in or you'd want to stay away from. So look for either a turnkey provider, an agent, or someone that can help you navigate that market and understand which neighborhoods you should look in and which ones you should stay away from.
It's funny, every real estate investor knows that real estate investing is local, even hyper-local, but somehow when they try to extrapolate that thought to a different market, hundreds of miles away or thousands of miles away, they tend to broad brush stroke that market. So it's not so much about the market as it is about the submarket. And that's what we're talking about here. Submarkets that have a good ratio of rent income to purchase price, where you're expected to have a good tenant base, where you can maintain the occupancy that you need over the long term. So, Aundrea, though you've lived there for a year and a half, you made a specific site visit with the provider, and I know that you toured 3 properties. So tell us about that in-person tour that you did there.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to go out to our providers' offices, see, how they run operations day to day, meet their team. And then they took me on a tour of 3 different properties that were all in different neighborhoods in Detroit. Kind of the first thing I noticed is, number one, the neighborhoods that they had these properties in, they're not what you would think of with typical Detroit. They were nice neighborhoods. They felt safe. They felt good to be in. The finishes on the properties were nice. So the homes were nice and clean, new paint, new countertops, soft close cabinets. The ones that I looked at had new furnaces, new water heaters. I don't think all of them may necessarily have that, but the ones that I saw did. If I needed to live in a home and were going to rent, there were homes I wouldn't mind living in myself. And they were all a little different. There were some, that may have refinished hardwood floors. There's some that may have new flooring in it. Some had these really nice balconies out back coming off the bedroom. So they had a lot of character, but they still felt newer.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Aundrea. Some boots on the ground from living there for a year and a half. So learn more about some of the best rent-to-price ratios in the United States. What you can do at our GRE Marketplace website now is look at sample properties in this Detroit metro market. As you know, the provider welcomes you on a tour. They want you to see their market. And if that's something you'd like to consider, get started and connect with them at GRE Marketplace. And that is at gremarketplace.com/Detroit. For Aundrea, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.